Hi everyone, I'm Gary Null, on location. Today we're going to be talking about how adding the omega-6 fatty acids to your diet could help prevent heart disease. This is the Cochrane database of collaboration of some of the best scientists in the world. Then I'm going to play a clip from last evening's Tucker Carlson show where he railed against the climate change movement and specifically took issue with the young 16-year-old who is the voice of the new environmental movement for all young people around the world. So I'm going to play it in its full context. It's 6 minutes long, nothing taken out of context, and then I'd like to respond. And it's not to demean Tucker, but rather to provide a different perspective. My hope is that if this gets to him, and let's see if the people in this audience could get the clip, my response to Tucker, to him, as well as the 10 to 12 articles that are fully referenced, fully documented, fully vetted for scholarship, that are not political, they're not ideological, they're simply the truth about the world we live in and our impact upon its resources and each other. So, after the Tucker clip, please download it from prn.fm, and the articles, we've made it very easy. They're right there front and present. Jesse and Travis have made sure that you can just go there and take these articles. You should be sharing these. These are not talking points. These are in-depth classrooms on the air about the truth about the environment. And share them with Tucker. After all, recently, Tucker had the courage, rare, to come out on Fox and condemn the Koch brothers. When you condemn the Koch brothers, you're condemning two of the most powerful people on the planet with the hundreds of organizations they control and fund and their enormous influence over the media. So he just, in effect, that could have been a career-ending comment, but he did it. And on some issues, like having Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on talk about vaccines, no one else would in the mainstream media. He did. On some issues, he is certainly on the right side of truth. On others, he is not. But I believe that people can change if they're given the truth and let them in their own time see how much they have been falsely conditioned by propaganda to believe in the wrong side of an issue. So let's see if we couldn't get Tucker Carlson to be on the right side of environmental issues. Boy, wouldn't that be wonderful for all of his audience to have a different perspective. Also, I'm glad that people are watching and listening to the passion, the outrage coming from the young people testifying before Congress and Davos and UN. We need someone who's outraged to be unbridled, uncompromised by any form of media or social etiquette, to simply get in the face and say what's wrong. And it took someone who is not polluted, corrupted, to do that. So good for her. But before her, there was another person. Her name was Severin, S-E-V-E-R-N, Cullis, C-U-L-L-I-S. Suzuki, S-U-Z-U-K-I. And she was at the Rio Summit in 1992. And she was even more powerful, even more educated. And so I found this clip because I wanted to show you the principle of the 5 harmonizing realities that must all come together. You have to have the right idea. Both do. At the right time, have the right support system, be in the right place, and be the right person. They were both the right persons, but the current Thunberg, she has the right support system. The other one did not. One thing left out of the equation, no matter what truth you're offering, it won't be served to the public the way it should. Also, time permitting today, a whistleblower from Google reveals censorship. It's time that all of us understood how deep, perverse, and malignant this pathology of identity politics has become. and it is corrupting all of society. And for those who have lived through the veneer and substance, the reality and illusion of what it means to be a good Democrat liberal, then this is a wake-up call. Be a good person. Be indifferent to what side the truth is on. Just look for the truth. And this talks it, it shares it. So we have a lot to share today. We always begin with the latest on health and healing. Now, the omega-6 fatty acids are often seen as harmful. And indeed, the way they're used, that could be true. They're highly pro-inflammatory, especially when they've been refined and then cooked. For example, do you ever think about the oil that a French fry comes from, or potato chip, or any of the multitude of deep-fried foods? In fact, one study showed that they had the consistency similar to varnish. Terrible for your digestive system and very harmful. But when consumed in place of saturated fats, they can be beneficial to your health if they're raw, unfiltered, and organic. This was published in the peer-reviewed journal Circulation, and it suggested the omega-6 fatty acids could be just as essential as the omega-3, that's the fish oils, in reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease. And they looked at 30 studies in 13 countries with over 69,000 people, and they found that the omega-6, by the way, that's linoleic acid, L-I-N-O-L-E-I-C, linoleic acid. That's your omega. That would be sunflower oil, safflower oil, as examples. But get it raw, unfiltered, and organic. Makes all the difference in the world. And it can make a big difference in your health, especially your cardiovascular health. And that's important. Article was also published in The Lancet, another article looking at 20 different studies in 10 countries of 40,000 people. And once again, they looked at the arachidonic acid. That's what you get when you eat meat. That's a bad acid, very inflammatory. And it also contributes to type 2 diabetes. But then they looked at what happens with the omega-6 fatty acids, and it's very beneficial. Again, if you take in small quantities and you don't have them in any converted form, meaning where they're not converted through high heat or through processing. And researchers of the American Heart Association have reported that the body converts only a small amount of linoleic acid into arachidonic acid, even when linoleic acid is abundant in the diet. That's interesting. But most of the time people are getting their arachidonic acid from eating meat, and that's a very, very bad acid. That's why meat is bad. And then you have a meta-analysis of 6 randomized trials, and they revealed that replacing saturated fat, that's your meat, with omega-6 decreased the risk of heart attacks and other coronary events by 24%. And that was reported in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And then another study, a large study, 11 cohort studies, found that replacing saturated fats, meat, dairy, with the polyunsaturated fats, including the omega-3s and 6s, decreased heart disease rates more than substituting them with monounsaturated fats. So, once again, you need the fats. You want a good source of the omega-3s? Flax seeds. They're great. And flax seeds also contain an acceptable omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. So you can get omega-6 fatty acids from sunflower seeds, walnuts, and pumpkin seeds. That way, if you're eating the whole food, you're getting the whole fat in an unaltered form, and that's the best way of getting it into your body. From Case Western Reserve University comes a study about fungus in humans is identified for the first time as a key factor in Crohn's disease. The School of Medicine, led by a team of international researchers, has for the first time identified a fungus as a key factor in the development of Crohn's disease. And they linked a new bacterium to the previous bacteria associated with Crohn's. And this was published in the current issue of MBio. And so They're looking at different ways of treating it now, because with Crohn's disease, I've counseled so many people with Crohn's, they end up with severe inflammation of their bowel. That leads to abdominal pain, diarrhea, weight loss, and fatigue. And so, since it is bacterial, my response would be pau d'arco, P-A-U-D-A-R-C-O, pau d'arco, ginseng, gotu kola, and vitamin C with quercetin, probiotics, and that can and aloe vera can substantially change the medium. Also, lots of garlic and lots of onions, because the sulfur in there is extremely good for killing fungus, and that fungus can be killed with garlic alone. But if you've got a super duper situation, you'll use some colloidal silver and some wild oregano oil diluted with bee propolis into a 12-ounce glass, and with some black cumin still, and that will really flush out the bacteria. So that's good. At least we're knowing more about it. Also, smoking leaves, this is from the U.S. National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, can leave lasting marks on DNA. So smoking cigarettes can leave a lasting imprint on our DNA, altering more than 7,000 genes in ways that may contribute to the development of diseases. So reviewing results from blood samples taken from nearly 16,000 people in 16 prior studies, the researchers also found that those who stopped smoking, most genes recovered within 5 years of quitting. Now, there are protocols. I have two for heavy smokers. I actually invented these protocols back in the 1970s to help my family, my brothers, my mother and father, all my aunts and uncles. They all were heavy smokers, 3-4 packs a day, and to help their lungs. So it's as vital today as ever. The key is you want to get methylating agents into the system. The more living foods like wheatgrass juice, that's excellent. Beet juice, that's excellent. Sauerkraut, excellent. The juice for helping to detoxify from the effects of tobacco on your lungs. But it's remember, every one of those cigarettes and marijuana smoking. Again, people are so quick to conflate when they react instead of using reason. I support the legalization of all drugs. I do not believe we should have a war on drugs at all. I believe it's probably the dumbest thing we've done since Prohibition. I believe that if you have a well-informed public, there will be those who engage in behavior that is self-destructive. We cannot help that. We cannot stop it. It's part of the human condition. All of us at different times in our life make stupid mistakes that we would later regret, but better that we made a mistake and learned a lesson than to be living in some torturous conditioned environment where we're not allowed any freedoms of independent thought. Remember, freedom only works in a responsible way when you use it responsibly. When freedom is used irresponsibly, simply because you can say something you do something you do it, consume something because you can, then that is no longer freedom in a constructive way. That's a form of emotional anarchy, and it works against you. It's like putting yourself on a guillotine slab, putting your head in the noose, and toying with the rope to see if you can release it or not, or grab it before it falls and cut your head off. Having counseled thousands of people as head of drug addiction at Trafalgar Hospital, I can tell you that the rationalizations and excuses people give for doing very destructive behavior makes no sense at all from someone listening to it. But it makes all the sense in the world for someone who's justified it. The danger is, do we ever stop before we justify a bad choice and ask what is the likely outcome? Well, the likely outcome when you ban drugs is someone is going to immediately provide a black market for it. And instead of asking why do so many people in the United States require drugs that are grown in poppy field by warlords in Afghanistan, that we, the United States, our armed forces, are protecting those poppy fields from the Taliban, and then all the drugs that are grown or supplied from methamphetamine and Tylenols and other drugs in South and Central America and Mexico. So we go on these rampages, and hundreds of thousands of people are dead. Thousands disappeared and presumed dead. And yet we don't ask a question. If we're making it illegal to grow and distribute and illegal to use, why aren't we asking what is causing a person to do something that could injure themselves? Because if we had to take that door and open it, all of our virtues and values would end up being challenged. So just keep it closed. It's one of our blind spots in our hypocrisy. But if you legalize the drugs, and remember, the gateway drug is not marijuana. The gateway drug is alcohol. And more people die of alcohol-related illnesses each year, and then tobacco. You talk about a big killer. Over 25 million Americans have died of tobacco-related disease in the last 100 years. But it's still available to purchase. And with more education, more people are less likely, and with more to use it, and also better able to understand what impact it's going to have. But if you had clinics everywhere, and you would help people get off drugs and rebalance their lives and expunge their records from prison and help them get gainful employment and have the psychological counseling that would be available 24/7 in every city in America, you would see the use of drugs just plummet. But why do something rational and humanistic and spiritual with a positive outcome when you can continue to politicize it and gain from that from core groups that are completely isolationist from any intelligent thought, purely reactive? In any case, when you're smoking marijuana, you're destroying your DNA, and that's not a good thing. I've dealt with a lot of people who have lost their lives, including 2 friends of mine, who had no lives because the marijuana created delusional psychoses and paranoia to a level they could not communicate. In fact, one of my friends, a longtime friend, he didn't want the counseling. He didn't want help. He felt he was fine. It allowed him deeper insights. And then one day his son called, nice guy, and he said, what am I going to do? I can't have him around people. He goes off in these tirades and rants. And I said, well, have him come. I'll work with him. And he did. He arrived. And by that evening, he was on a plane out of here. He had no intention. He did it for his son, and that was it. Spent the rest of his life living in Hawaii, up in the mountains, ranting. So I've seen what happens, for those who are disconnected from the reality of a choice. Even a healthy food, if you ate too much of it, is no longer healthy for you. From Oxford University, health benefits of evening classes revealed. What's this mean? It means that those with a taste for adult education classes have long known it, but now Oxford University scientists have confirmed that taking part in the weekly sessions can boost well-being regardless of the subject being studied. That's important. In partnership with the Workers' Education Association, the largest voluntary sector provider of adult education in England and Scotland, a team from Oxford's Department of Experimental Psychology studied the attendees at 7 separate daytime adult education classes, and their findings were published in a series of papers. And each class took place over 7 months and included a break in the middle, and then they were evaluated and found that everything improved. Everything. So overall, attendees at all 7 classes had improved mental and physical health, reported more satisfaction with their lives at the end of their courses. So I'm a big believer in adult education. So choose the courses that stimulate you, that empower you, and you're going to benefit. And finally, from Taipei Medical University, published in the peer-reviewed journal Pain Physician, a meta-analysis concluded the benefits of magnesium for migraines. There's a lot of studies on magnesium. It's the single most important mineral in your body. But this is just one more to show that it can both treat and prevent migraines. And that was the the outcome of this study. In fact, in the magnesium group, there was a 77% lower than the risk associated with standard treatment, which was saline. So you get a big benefit when you're taking magnesium. So that's the latest on health and healing. We're going to take a break and come back. And when we come back, we're going right into last evening's Tucker Carlson on the environment. I chose not to edit it so that what he has to say, he is saying in its completeness. And then I will go through and offer Tucker a constructive input to allow him to understand that he is on the wrong side of his information, and it's nothing more than propaganda. My hope is that he will have an opening of consciousness. If new information that is accurate and non-political is given to him, then he can change. If he chooses to, it's worth a try. Back in a moment.
I know you want to leave me, but I refuse to let you go. If I have to beg, plead for your sympathy, I don't mind, 'cause you mean that much to me. Ain't too proud to beg, and you know it. Please don't leave me, girl. Ain't too proud to plead, baby, baby. Please don't leave me, girl. Now I heard a crying man is half a man with no sense of pride.
Memories. It might be the last relaxing moment you have for a while. We're about to wreck your peace of mind. It turns out that all is not well on this blue planet of ours, far from it. Indeed, it appears that the Earth itself is facing what we're going to call tonight an existential threat from climate change. Now, what does the term existential threat actually mean, you ask? Honestly, we don't know, but it sounds absolutely terrifying, so watch carefully.
That climate change is real, is an existential threat to our country and the entire planet.
If NATO is about the common defense, the biggest existential threat is climate.
This is climate change. It really is the existential threat.
We're going to have to address the most existential threat to our nation and the world, climate change.
On climate change, the greatest existential threat that we face.
That we are facing a climate crisis. It represents an existential threat to who we are as human beings.
A threat to who we are as humans. Well, there are a number of questions here. Let's see if we can unpack them. The first one, is climate change real? And that's an easy one. Of course it's real. Climate always changes. If you're in the United States, for example, the ground that you're standing on right now was, not so long ago really, covered with glacial ice a mile thick. Now it's not covered in glacial ice a mile thick. So what happened? What happened is climate change. And that's been happening since the Earth cooled. Is human activity accelerating climate change? Can we reverse or slow climate change? Despite what they tell you, no one really knows. But the real question here has nothing to do with climate science. It has to do with people who pretend they understand climate science. Do those people actually believe what they're saying? Well, let's see. Here was Kamala Harris recently talking about how red meat contributes to the absolutely existential threat of climate change.
As a nation, we actually have to have a real priority at the highest level of government around what we eat and in terms of healthy eating, because we have a problem in America.
But would you support changing the dietary guidelines?
Yes.
You know, the food pyramid, what people
yes.
are
yes.
to reduce red meat specifically.
Yes, I would.
Got that? Kamala Harris is a good person. And because she's a good person, a much better person than you are, she cares about the existential threat of climate change so much that she's willing to forego red meat. That's what she told CNN viewers recently. But when she's in the pork-producing state of Iowa, though, it's a very different story. Just this past weekend, Harris attended the annual Polk County Democratic Party steak fry. She took her turn working the grill, posing for the cameras. And by the way, so did all of the other Democratic candidates. Liz Warren was there, Beto O'Rourke, even Cory Booker, who says he's a vegan. Organizers grilled more than 10,000 steaks over the weekend. Tape of the event shows plumes of ozone-destroying meat smoke rising heavenward. The candidates, standing amidst all of this, seem wholly unconcerned. Are you surprised? Don't be surprised. This is what climate activism has become, a performative stunt mixed with hypocrisy. These are the people who promise to crack down on your cheeseburgers while flying across the country private. No one says a word about it. Last week, millions of concerned progressives took part in a so-called climate strike. In their wake, they left mountains of litter. Just today in Washington, climate activists demanded change by blocking roads, causing gridlock, and throwing confetti on the ground. Well, if you're under 40, you might be surprised to learn that people didn't used to express concern about the environment by littering. That used to seem weird. But then the point of environmentalism used to be about nature and preserving it and protecting it. The point now is very different. The point now is political power. You gin up a crisis and you demand the population submits to your will or else. And as you do that, of course, you don't need to fight fair or acknowledge democracy, or even make a rational case for your position. You do whatever it takes. You'll even use children, if it helps. Just today, for example, a 16-year-old Swedish girl addressed the United Nations at the behest of climate activists. Here's part of what she said.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? If you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe.
You stole my childhood. Do what I want you to do, or else you're evil. How do you respond to statements like that? The truth is, you can't respond. And of course, that's the point. When you use children to demand power, they become a kind of human shield. You can hide safely behind them. No one can criticize you. But who would do something that unscrupulous? Anyone who would do that is someone who would literally do anything to seize control.
Okay, Tucker, you've made your point. We're going to play you two of your colleagues at Fox News yesterday, and I'm only going to play the first 2 minutes because they make all of their arguments in about a minute and a half each. Here it is.
My dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
That's teen climate activist Greta Thunberg shaming world leaders at the United Nations for inaction on climate change. She's garnering a great deal of attention for that scathing speech, but there has already been concern in the media about using child activists. A New York Times piece says climate change is scaring kids. Here's how to talk to them. A Washington Examiner opinion piece saying this Greta Thunberg thing is child abuse. Let's bring in Fox News contributors Doug Schoen and Mark Thiessen. Gentlemen, great to have you.
Good to be with you, Mike.
Mark, are adults being unfair to children like Greta?
Yeah, they're terrifying them. I mean, look, the reality is you've got people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying the world's going to end in 12 years. And if you're an impressionable child, that's terrifying to hear that from responsible adults. What responsible adults ought to be saying to kids is it's going to be all right. The world is not going to end. Climate change is a real problem, and we're going to address it. But the way we're going to address it is through capitalism and through free enterprise, which is creating the technology that will allow us to reduce carbon emissions. And guess what? America is the strongest free enterprise system in the world. Our emissions are going down, and the world's going to be okay.
Doug, some are asking, where are the parents?
Well, I'm asking, where's the United States? Why don't we re-engage with the Paris Accords? Why don't we press the Chinese to do the same? I think Mark's right. we don't want to scare kids, but there were millions of kids all over the world protesting. We can't just call that a massive case of child abuse. There's a serious problem with carbon emissions, global warming, and we should deal with it as responsible people, responsible grown-ups, and let kids be kids and protest. We have a history in this country of children, young adults acting as activists. I remember I got involved in the anti-Vietnam War protests. I'm as proud now of that as I was then.
The Washington Examiner reports Greta began suffering from depression as a child, by her own admission, in part because she learned about...
Okay, you have 2 points of view. Now people on the right are saying that if you're a young person like Greta and others, and you protest like this, you're scaring other people. I believe that all people should be very afraid at this moment. I do not mean terrified. I mean made aware. Look, of all of the problems we've had with the environment over the past 50 years, it is only now, with a foreigner, a 16-year-old, who was 15 when she started her protest, who has galvanized the world's attention, the younger people's attention, because they represented probably 95% of the people who were at these demonstrations, to come forward. Now, in and of itself, turning out for a march doesn't change anything. We've had many different marches. You have to be able to change the levers of power. You have to be able to influence policymakers and opinion leaders. And there's not even an intelligent discussion of how to do that. If you want to know how to do that, it's simple. You have Greta and others as a group representing different countries, young people, teenagers, and we will provide them with a list of 100,000 retired former CEOs and CFOs and heads of American industries and world industries. These people have nothing to do. When they were alive and working every day and they were greenlighting projects, it was their responsibility to bring profit to and financial stability as fiduciaries to their corporate interest. Therefore, they would make decisions that were based upon the economics rather than morals. They were heads of pharmaceutical companies that greenlit drugs that they knew were toxic and would ultimately be withdrawn, but they would make enough profit in between it being marketed and being withdrawn that it was the cost of doing business to pay a $5 billion fine in the case of Vioxx and Merck. But Merck is a serial offender. It just can't help itself. But now that those people have left, my personal experience in meeting them, counseling them, is that they look back, nobody calls them, the phone doesn't ring. And now they're left with a world that is an echo chamber of their own thoughts. All they go out every day to do is play golf or tennis and remember when. As one of them told me, it was really startling when I went to a restaurant where I used to have a reserved seat that no matter how many busy people there were and how many people were standing in line, my table was never taken. It was always for me. Now I can't even get into the same restaurant because I walked away, I retired, and someone else took my place. Now they have that table. And he said, that's why, and this man said this to me, he says, the death we die that is most painful is when we become irrelevant. And all of us who were once captains of industry are now irrelevant. All that we ever get is a phone call requesting funds for some dinner donation. Now, those are people who could now use their tremendous skills, their managerial skills, their communication skills, and their Rolodexes to help movements inspired by and led by the young people. But on their own, by themselves, nothing's going to change. Nothing. I've seen it too many times. The March Against Monsanto. We had people that dwarfed this latest march. Nothing changed. Every single state, Colorado. In fact, I have to thank Sherry Bernson, because it was Sherry Bernson who was the courageous, dynamic, absolutely fearless warrior for public truth on Colorado Public Television that aired my documentary, Seeds of Death, 88 times. No PBS station in America airs any documentary 88 times, but every time she would air it late at night, generally after 11 o'clock, it would gain new support for the station, and that's how we almost won against GMOs in Colorado. But in the end, GMOs won because they had the people currently in power who can write the big checks and hire the big PR firms and have the lobbyists in Washington and the state legislatures controlled by the American Legislative Exchange Council. So you see, having a young child who's so concerned about the future that she is sacrificing her time in school to go out and inspire their children to get out and young people to get out and raise hell. Why? Because those young people are going to go home and complain to their parents. Why are we still eating meat? That's an important thing for them to do, to get off meat, to go vegan, or start planting trees at a local level in your local community. We're planting no trees. We're doing nothing in the United States. And that's why her anger is, because here you had real buffoons, presidents of the United States, all presidents of the United States, clear back to Dwight Eisenhower. He was the last decent president. All of them utterly in contempt of doing anything except platitudes, because for their base, if they walked naked into the convention center, there would be a criticism about it. Doesn't he look nice? He looks very presidential, even naked, doesn't he? I mean, the stupidity of Barack Obama, one of the most intellectually bankrupt human beings, yet an outstanding academic career, just no decency or ethics. The Clintons, serial offenders of every moral and ethic, who destroyed the environment. Barack Obama destroyed the environment. And yet they'll be the first people on the Rolodex of the corporate liberals who are called to say, what do we do? What do we do? Well, let's have a fundraiser. The media will cover us fondly, as it always says. We can go on NBC and they'll kiss our ass before we go in the studio. In fact, it's a policy, I think I read it somewhere, that before you're allowed on the set, all the hosts have to kiss your ass if you're a famous, wealthy person like George Soros or anyone else. It's sickening. So she is representing the cumulative anger for all the other people who want to see change, but no levers of change are ever put in their hands. So for Tucker, I believe you mean well. I just believe you're on the absolute wrong side of the information. You're smart enough to know that your reality first started as a perception. And your perception was manipulated by the sources that you were choosing. It's no different people on the left. So Carlson, please don't play dumb by questioning the term existential. Intellectually, you should know that you used it in improper means. Existentialism is associated with Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and Sartre. And the term existentialism became prominent in German philosophy in the late 1910s. It entered the English language in 1941 and simply refers to humans experiencing their existence living on Earth. So the term existential threat, which any grammar school kid could understand, simply means a threat to humans' existence on the planet. A nuclear holocaust is also an existential threat. Humans could not survive a global nuclear winter because the Earth's conditions would not support our lives. It is that simple. Only a moron like the Koch brothers or Trump, I can't say that about Trump because he's not smart enough to realize what kind of moron he is, could not understand this. Humans are only one species among the estimated 8.7 million species that now inhabit this planet with us. There are hundreds of millions of species before us that confronted existential threats from the climate-changing environment and are now extinct because they could no longer survive the climate conditions on Earth. When we get out of our hubris of thinking that humans somehow transcend their morality that depends upon Earth conditions that enable our species to survive, then we're simply just another form of animal utterly dependent upon the Earth's climate and the environment that can or cannot sustain us. The argument is extraordinarily simple. Are the climate and environmental changes now underway leading the planet to conditions that will no longer support life itself, including human life? That is the fundamental question. So, Tucker, you say, quote, no one really knows if climate change is due to human activity. This is the common climate changer lie that is repeated endlessly by right-wing think tanks such as the Heartland Institute and others funded by the Koch brothers. Or now, thank goodness, one Koch brother. Yes, what percentage of scientists are required before you can say there is a consensus? 51%? Well, according to NASA and their analysis of all peer-reviewed climate change papers indicate 97% of all scientists agree that climate change is anthropogenic. And this is global, not just among U.S. scientists. This means, Tucker, that thousands of scientists with no conflict of interest, no hardwired ideological biases with American corporations or banks or insiders like the Kochs are telling us what they believe the science shows. And polling of scientists regarding human-caused climate change began in 1990. That's just 30 years ago. This is not new. Tucker, therefore, you're aligning yourself with the remaining 3% who deny this fact. And those 3%, the majority are not climatologists. Speaking about climate activists leaving trash and litter, good point. I remember when I was the very first day of Earth Day, and I was the keynote speaker down in Dallas, Texas, and there were thousands, tens of thousands of people. And after my talk, I walked around and the entire place was trash. Everywhere was trash. And I thought at the time, how ironic. People are sitting there listening to me talk, drinking colas, eating hamburgers, smoking cigarettes, drinking beer. What part of this do they not yet fully understand? I was disappointed. I was so disappointed I wondered, can we differentiate coming together to hear some music from the real meaning of what it should be to have an Earth Day? But I believe we have evolved. So what we should do is take a look at the world you live in today. And since a disproportionate amount of your time is spent on the border crisis, which is a crisis and needs to be addressed, but here's what is not being focused upon. The alignment with Koch brothers and the GOP, which shows no respect for preservation of nature. What has Trump and the GOP accomplished in just the last 2 years? Well, how about this for an honor roll? They've rolled back 10 air pollution and emission regulations and in process of rolling back another 14, which means that Ralph Nader's magnificent efforts, Herculean efforts to protect our environment, our water, our soil, nature. Now, you're a naturalist from what I understand, and you like to go camping, and that's terrific. But the air that you're going to be breathing, the water you could be swimming in or boating in, the land that you could be camping on is going to be more polluted because of the rollback. Also, Trump trashed the Clean Power Plan and the Affordable Clean Energy Act that restricted methane release. He rolled back 9 environmental laws protecting land from drilling, mining, extraction, and in the process of rolling back 9 more. He changed the definition of protected rivers and wetlands so private companies can have access to exploit them. He removed protection for 2.2 million acres of federal land in Utah. That's the largest elimination of protected land in U.S. history. He rolled back 4 regulations protecting the public from toxic chemicals and in the process of rolling back 1 more. He rolled back 5 regulations protecting water resources from pollution and in the process of rolling back 4 more. Individual states and cities and towns have filed more lawsuits against the Trump White House for his orders to further destroy land, water, and air and wildlife than another presidency and all other presidencies combined in history. The executive order to revoke protections for U.S. coastlines, including the Great Lakes, in order to open up these regions for energy extraction. Executive orders shouldn't be used this way. Harvard scientists estimate that Trump's policies on air and toxic chemicals pollution will add 80,000 annual deaths. So, Tucker, leaving litter in urban streets is far more sinful than those Trump policies which you failed to address. The U.S. military is the #1 polluter in America. When did you address that? The false budget that they have, you have a staff. You can do research. And we have, with a far smaller staff, and yet we're the ones who found that the U.S. defense budget should only be $200 billion a year, and the $1.2 trillion extra that they're given should be recaptured and put on rebuilding inner cities and creating sustainable lifestyles in these cities. And by the way, you go after Greta Thunberg, and you played a clip from which her direct and accusatory speech at the UN yesterday, but you stopped the clip just before perhaps her most important statement, quote, "All you talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth," end quote. That sounds like she might have had Fox News and its business programs in mind. Didn't we just hear a man say, stop scaring the kids, let them be kids, and let our open society of laissez-faire, let the free market. The free market, unless I miss something, is what's created the pollution. All the major industries are free market industries. All of our nuclear power plants and all the natural resources, that's free industry. Gas hydrofracking, free industry. Oil, free industry. And think of the pollution that's coming out of all these factory farms, like the Stevens farms and the other farms down in Arkansas. Free enterprise. And what about all this super packaging and the waste? We're not paying attention. You can challenge the idea of a plastic straw, as if that's a metaphor for the entire environment. But why don't you take a trip out to the Pacific Ocean and go into the garbage patch, which is 3 times the size of Texas, and see the millions of dead animals there and fish and mammals because their bodies are filled with plastic debris. And you see what a problem it is. And why don't you take a look at Fukushima? Every fish now caught in the Pacific has traces of radioactivity in it. Why isn't that an issue? Isn't that also garbage? Garbage in the ocean versus garbage after a march? Which is a greater threat to humanity? Which is a greater existential threat? We can come by the next day and sweep up the street and get rid of the signs and debris that was left over from a march. We can't go out the next day and clean up the oceans. We can't clean up the air. We can't clean up the soil. We can't clean up anything that's an actual existential threat because it's too great. And we're not even trying because those polluters, including the Koch brothers or brother, have been responsible for creating the very industries that create the pollution and then by the legislators so that no action is taken. But you are correct, Tucker, and good for you for pointing out the utter hypocrisy of these lowlifes running for president, who I wouldn't vote for any of them, with the exception of one from Hawaii. Utter hypocrisy. They say that, we've got to give up meat. Good. Become vegan, Corey Bake, and then he's out there grilling meat. What kind of condescension into the abyss of Dante's third level is Cory Booker working from? Also, you made a comment about ozone rising from the meat smoke at a Democrat gathering. Sorry, Tucker. Ozone is not emitted from barbecuing meat, which reveals how little education you have on greenhouse gas emissions and basic chemistry in general. Ozone is oxygen. And how can cooking meat over a fire release oxygen? But you're not a vegan, and that's your business. That's your freedom of choice. But please don't fearmonger that suggests that those who are vegan are somehow coming after your cheeseburgers. We're not. I do not proselytize. I've been a vegan almost my entire life. And I've written a lot of articles and books on it, done documentaries on it. But I believe in freedom of choice. But if we're going to deal with the environment, at some point we must be honest enough to deal with the 2 biggest factors contributing to pollution right now: chemical and commercial agriculture, and their mono gardening, soybeans genetically engineered, and the destruction of the rainforest, including the Amazon rainforest, is directly due to the logging the Chinese are using to build cheap furniture to sell around the world, but also to feed its population, which is increasing in its desire for meat. And we're doing the same. So every time you have a hamburger, there's at least about 100 different cows were sacrificed for part of that hamburger. But then the cows were fed from soybeans grown in the Amazon, and we sacrificed the ozone or the oxygen capacity of the trees, and the carbon sinks to keep the carbon in the ground instead of the atmosphere. And then the cows give off nitrogen. And you're not talking about a few hamburgers. You're talking about 80 billion sentient creatures sacrificed each year. And this is unfortunate. So you see, pull back and look at the larger picture. Your hamburger does make a difference. But just to put a dot on this, 40% of the Earth's surface is devoted to feeding the Earth's 7 billion citizens. Each year, the livestock sector globally produces 586 million tons of milk, 124 million tons of poultry, 91 million tons of pork, 59 million tons of cattle and buffalo meat, and 11 million tons of meat from sheep and goats. That 285 million tons of meat altogether, or about 80 pounds per person. If it were all divided evenly, it's not. Americans 270 pounds of meat on a year basis, while Bangladesh eats 4 pounds. 1.3 billion tons of grain are consumed by farm animals each year, and nearly all of it is fed to livestock. The highest total of livestock-related greenhouse gas emissions comes from the developing world, which accounts for 75% of global emissions from cattle and 56% of the global emissions from poultry and pigs. According to the IPCC, globally, livestock production accounts for 27% of anthropogenic methane emissions, and methane accounts for almost 40% of agriculture's greenhouse gas emissions. And we're not speaking now of health impacts, where every single scientific study shows that eating a plant-based diet is healthier, eating an animal-based diet causes heart disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity, etc. So you're supporting a double negative. The meat industry is bad for our health, including our children's, and no, children should be made aware of the consequences of their actions. We should get them out of this bubble they're living in as if somehow they shouldn't be made anxious by anything. Life is nothing but a series of anxious moments to which we are either able to rise and understand the lessons and become stronger, or we recede into being a perpetual victim. She's not trying to scare the world. She's trying to inform them. And if that makes them uncomfortable, so be it. Please send the articles in this clip to Tucker Carlson. My hope is that he is open enough, progressive enough, that he might want to look and see what he's been missing wrong on the environment. We'll be happy to share any additional insights. All of ours is non-political. I'm told that we have in studio, one of our attorneys, Neil. Hi, Neil.
Hi, Gary.
What's up?
Gary, we received a letter in the office yesterday while you were away, and it's so incredibly timely that we all agreed it had to be read. Just in context, as you know, we're in the process of challenging Wikipedia, primarily for its unvarnished bias against alternative and complementary medicine and all those who practice it. Much of what's written is simply lies, and we have learned much more from insiders within Wikipedia, editors and administrators who are sick and tired, and they have come to us because they know they have an outlet, and we are going to continue to publish even more and more information showing how Wikipedia is not an encyclopedia, but merely an opinion blog of entrenched interest. And the interests that control medicine and health are dead set against any kind of complementary or alternative medicine and against any who practice it, including persons such as you, Deepak Chopra, and many others. And we are going to continue to dig into the dirty cavity that is Wikipedia. And that's why it's so amazing that we received this letter from someone who knows what you have been able to do using the techniques and treatments that Wikipedia condemns as quackery or pseudoscience. And I'm going to read this letter. It is from a research scientist who has known you for a very long time. Dear Gary, I apologize for taking so long to send you this overdue letter of acknowledgement. As you know, I have been a research scientist at the Institute of Applied Biology since 1970, but had also been conducting cancer research 5 years before then. I will never forget when you first started working at the Institute. You were an idealist and in many respects a naive young man. You were interested in aging. Among the many divisions of the Institute, no one was interested in natural health, diet, or aging. If you remember, I was one of only 2 full staff members who would come to the 3rd floor, where you were always engaged in original and applied research. Over the years, I observed well over 100 original experiments you conducted. What captured the attention of the director and senior scientist was that you were able to extend the lifespan of rats by nearly 30% with intermittent fasting and what you called the living foods diet. We were also impressed by the food and juice matrix you created for preventing and treating disease. I recall the woman suffering from terminal pancreatic cancer at the hospital across the street from the Institute. She was in hospice care, and you requested to have an opportunity to help her. The hospital's leading oncologist was adamantly against the idea, but the Institute's director won out, and you were permitted to work with the patient. 3 months later, based on your protocol, she was cancer-free and returned to her normal life. That was when the director requested I work with you more because your ideas were completely revolutionary. That was around the same time when we were inundated with AIDS cases and were largely unsuccessful in treating them. One physician asked if there was anything you could do, and you offered to try. We established IV drip rooms and purchased intravenous vitamin C and other nutrients, and the staff implemented your AIDS protocol. Over the next 2 years, about 10 people with advanced AIDS reversed their HIV status and turned seronegative. All the infections disappeared and they were HIV and AIDS free. I briefly met one of those patients recently, and she's still healthy today. I remember when I met the director and the Institute board members one evening to request that these successes be made more public. They decided to remain silent because it might jeopardize funding. This work was not based on patentable drugs, and the advisory board said it would only draw negative attention because it was contrary to standard drug treatments. After the meeting ended, the director shrugged his shoulders and said it would not be the last time that someone accomplished something notable and would remain relatively unknown to the world. Shortly thereafter, you were awarded the honor of becoming an Institute Research Fellow and the youngest person to receive that honor. On another occasion, you were researching your energy healing over a 2-year period. One doctor told me not to communicate this with anyone also. You and several colleagues who were also healers were investigating the influence of prayer on mice with tumors and were able to reverse the cancer on 6 different occasions. We decided not to discuss it, although Dr. Stanley Kipper was aware of the work and supported it. I think the one study that got everyone's attention was actually authorized for release was your discovery that all plants contain the 8 essential amino acids. Therefore, animal protein consumption was unnecessary in one's diet. This meant that anyone could become vegetarian or vegan without compromising their amino acid intake. I was also present when you presented your egg project in a packed high school. The Institute's director introduced you and was extremely proud of your accomplishments. A month later, you were appointed head of the Department of Anti-Aging Science and Medicine. I personally enjoyed the hundreds of conversations we had with many of the unique minds you invited to the Institute, including Linus Pauling and George Borgstrom. There were too many to remember. You managed to turn the Institute into a creative oasis of visionary minds dedicated to saving lives, and yet the world was almost ignorant of this vital environment. I am sharing this with you now because I have had multiple strokes and my heart is giving out. However, I want to make sure that if it is my time to pass, you know the truth about how I, the Institute's director, and other scientists felt about the level of integrity and scientific brilliance that you honored us with over 3 decades. Best regards always, Elena.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
Well, what can I say? We're out of time, everyone. Thank you all for listening, and have a nice day.